Wait, is it? Where was it go? Oh, live. Okay, got it, got it. Yeah, so good morning or good evening, everyone, depending on what part of the world you're in. And thank you all for joining us for the first Career X webinar for this sprint. We're really excited to have you here, and we're really excited to get to know what a day in the life of a teacher looks like. Um, so today, the main goals of our event today are, to give you an inside look into the day-to-day responsibilities and activities of a teacher, and to demystify what a typical day in a teacher's life looks like. So we have a couple of special guests tonight. So we have Coach Christine, Coach JR, and Coach Anton, who will tell us about their days and their lives and what it actually means to be a teacher. So for today, we'll spend, just a couple minutes going through a set of questions about their background so they can tell us a bit more about, what they kind of do in the mornings, what actually happens when they teach a lesson, and so on and so forth. And then we'll move to questions on our Facebook. Um, so, starting with Coach JR, then Coach Anton, then Coach Christine, would you mind telling us a bit about, about yourself and then mention your kada?
Okay, hello. Good evening, everyone. So ako po si Coach JR and nagtuturo ako ng psychology sa Ateneo de Manila. And more specifically, ang tinuturo ko ay statistics, experimental psychology, gen psych, at saka understanding the self. So ito na yung bagong parang core course na tinuturo sa first year across all colleges. And so, bukod doon, practicing psychologist din ako. So, which is why psychology talaga yung tinuturo ko. So, I would say that teaching is more of yung parang it's my passion also aside from my profession. And so shout out sa Kada Mautak. What's up? Hello. Good evening.
Thanks, Coach JR. Coach Christine?
Okay, hi. Ako si Coach Christine. Ako ngayon ay isang guro sa unang baitang. Pero ang tinuturuan ko talaga early grade. So yun yung specialty ko. Pero ngayon, grade 1 ang hinahandle kong klase. Dati nagturo ako sa grade 3. Tapos minsan, rin ako, softball coach din ako. Tapos nagkaroon na rin ako ng experience sa pagtuturo sa kolehiyo. So yun yung ginagawa ko ngayon. Medyo range siya mula sa pinakabata hanggang sa medyo mas matatandang estudyante. Yeah.
Thanks, Coach Christine. Coach Anton?
Okay, good evening everyone. Magandang gabi sa lahat. So ako si Coach Anton. Siguro ako yung pinaka-outcast dito sa aming tatlong ngayon kasi out of the three of us, ako yung hindi nagtuturo ngayon. Pero dati, isa akong math teacher sa UP Integrated School. Actually, dati, co-faculty ko si Teacher Christine. So, ano nga pala, shoutout sa Kada Makabayan. Sana nandito kayong lahat ngayon.
Thank you.
Ayun.
Super backgrounds.
Shoutout ang Kada Masigla. Kada Masigla, hello!
So thank you po for that intro. Super exciting to see all of your backgrounds, tsaka to see, what you guys are doing now or you're teaching. So let's start in the morning. So pagkadating niyo po sa school, what do you normally do? What time do you normally wake up, get to school, and what is the first thing you do pagkadating niyo po sa school?
So same order, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Coach JR.
Alright, no worries. Ako, well, yung swerte sa college, ako nagtuturo kasi ako sa college, is hindi siya, kunwari, maaga, hindi necessarily na kailangan nandun ako ng 7 a.m. And so usually, yung mga classes ko, parang yung pinakamaaga ko ng classes mga 9:30. At nag-iiba siya every sem. So parang every half year, nag-iiba yung schedule ko. Pero medyo tinatry ko talaga na either late morning or early afternoon siya. Pero, I mean, yung flip side doon is nagtuturo din kasi ako ng stats sa grad school. Yung classes ng grad school, 6 p.m. So hanggang 9 p.m. naman ako sa school. So the first thing I do when I go to school is dumidiretso na ako sa class. Kasi by that time, again, swerte ako na parang nakakain na ako, nakaprepare na ako. And so dumidiretso na ako sa class ko. And so yeah, that's me in the morning, mga 9 a.m., 10 a.m., diretso ako class.
So ako naman, dahil grade 1 yung tinuturuan ko, medyo nakaset yung schedule namin. So ito yung konteksto nito bago pa nung pandemya. So bago yung bagong normal sa pagtuturo. So panghapon ako na teacher, 12 o'clock nagsisimula yung klase ko, pero 10 o'clock dapat nasa school na kami para kung may mga consultation, kung may mga bata na kailangan mag-makeup activities. Yung paggising ko sa umaga, depende kung gaano ako kahanda para dun sa araw na yon. So, normally, kung halimbawa sobrang handa naman ako, na-prepare ko the previous day yung kailangan kong ituro, kailangan kong materials, siguro mga 30 minutes before I have to leave, doon ako gumigising kasi medyo mabilis lang naman ako mag-prepare, ligo, bihis, tapos go na sa school. So, yun. Kung 10 o'clock nasa school ako, dahil medyo malapit lang naman yung school, siguro mga 9 or 9:30. Yun ang oras ng gising ko. Tapos mabilisang punta na lang sa school yun.
Sige, muli. Parang medyo odd one out na naman ako kasi unlike si Teacher Christine and si Sir JR, I didn't have the privilege of going to school a bit later in the day. Ako, during all my 3 years, I was assigned as a homeroom teacher. Kung homeroom teacher ka, usually ang ibig sabihin nun, opening period ka lagi. So, first period ko sa school ay 7 a.m. Woo! Gigising kagad yung diwa at isip ng mga bata dahil sa math namin ng ganun kaaga. So usually, back then, again, tulad ng sinabi ni Teacher Christine, before this pandemic happened, I usually wake up at 5:30 or 5, but mainly because minsan hindi siya halata, but then I'm actually quite an introverted person. So before the hectic and all the chaos in the school day, kailangan ko rin talaga ng oras para sa sarili ko, para ihanda yung sarili ko mentally, spiritually minsan kung kailangan. But then, yun. So, pagdating ko sa school na mga 6:45, ayun, medyo trying to get into the mood of things then. Kasi, di ba minsan, yung pagtuturo minsan parang nag-iiba rin yung character mo. Di ba? So, it's sort of getting into that role. That's the first thing that I have to do before I face my students at 7.
Wow.
Actually, parang mag-share yung una kong experience ng pagtuturo sa ibang school kasi. So, feeling ko baka magandang i-represent din yung mga DepEd teachers kasi ang na-experience ko noon, 6 o'clock ang homeroom period namin. Tapos pagka halimbawa Monday na may flag ceremony, 5:30 dapat nasa school ka na kasi flag ceremony. So, ayun, shout out din sa mga DepEd teachers na alam kong 6 o'clock nagsisimula na ng klase. So, yun yung hindi ko masyadong ma-imagine na paano kaya kung ginagawa ko pa rin hanggang ngayon yun. Medyo maaga. Hindi kasi ako morning person.
More power. Yeah, kami naman po sa grad school, yung pinaka-earliest class ko siguro 5 p.m. Pero yung latest class ko mga 10 p.m. So, more power to the morning people. So in relation to that, one thing na you all mentioned po was preparation. So when thinking about a particular lesson, or kanyari, Coach Antonio said, you teach math. When you're preparing for a lesson, what things do you consider, or how do you prepare when you're about to teach a lesson to your class? And yeah, let's start with Coach JR, Coach Christine, then go to Coach Anton.
Okay. One thing that I try to encourage in the classroom, I would say, is really some form of open communication. And so I find myself stopping lectures maybe every 5 to 10 minutes and be like, yo, do you guys get this? Because if not, I would really, really want to be able to clarify these things for you. Kasi hindi naman ito madali. Especially kasi sa stat, it builds on the previous lesson. And so, yun yung one of the major things na ginagawa ko is yung pagre-recap, I guess. So, I have to be, I guess, mindful na, ito yung pinag-usapan namin last meeting. So ngayon, siguro isa-spend ko yung first 10 minutes going through that. And, I mean, sometimes sasabihin naman nila kung saan sila nahirapan, pero yung mga, ibang beses, hindi, minsan, they might not just be in the mood to say what they're feeling. So, given na medyo a few years, or it's been, mga 5 years na tinuturo ko yung subject na to, parang alam ko na rin kung usually saan nahirapan yung mga students. So doon talaga ako nagpo-focus. So I guess in summary, it's really about knowing what to focus on when you enter the classroom. And that can be different from one class to another. So trying to individualize that. So yeah.
Ako naman, since I only teach one class, kasi pagka grade 1, self-contained siya. So ako yung teacher nila sa lahat ng subject. Tapos isang group of kids lang ang kasama ko buong araw. Pagdating sa preparations, ideally, yung day before, kunwari Sunday or Monday, day before, ayos na yung buong linggo. Pero syempre ideal yon sa sobrang dami ng kailangan mong gawin. Mahirap talagang mag-plan ahead. Kahit na sabihin mo, okay, next week plan ahead talaga. Pagdating doon biglang, may kailangan gawing iba, may sisingit na iba. Siguro in general, ang pinaka sinusubukan kong gawin sa mga pagpaplano ko ay kung paano ko i-utilize yung independent time ng mga bata. Parang isa sa mga pinaka natutunan ko talaga as a teacher, yung parang i-minimize mo yung teacher time, yung talking time mo as a teacher. Kasi nung una, akala ko talaga parang pag nagturo ka, humarap ka sa mga bata, magsasalita ka lang na magsasalita kasi kailangan nilang marinig yung mga sasabihin mo, lahat ng matututunan nila sa iyo manggagaling. Pero habang tumatagal, na-realize ko at natutunan ko na mas effective kung minimal lang yung teacher time, yung talking time ni teacher. Tapos most of the period is used for independent practice, for guided practice, yung talagang hands-on na yung mga bata yung makaka-experience ng lesson para mas maintindihan nila yung nangyayari. So shortcut lang, it's maraming mga variations, pero yung pinaka parang pattern niya is I do, we do, you do. So I don't know if the other teachers have heard of it. So usually ang nangyayari, ako muna, magsasalita muna ako and then tuturo ko sa inyo yung mga konsepto na kailangan yung malaman. Tapos we do as a group or by pairs or may kaibigan silang kasama, susubukan nila ng sila muna yung gumagawa. Pero guided ko pa rin. Tapos, at the end of the period, ang goal ay independently sana magawa nila or makapag-practice sila on their own para pag lumabas sila doon sa classroom, meron silang sense of ownership doon sa inaral nila na hindi sila passive lang na nakinig kay teacher na ito lang yung sinabi ni teacher, so ganito lang yung dapat natutunan ko. So talagang sana mas naging personal sa kanila at the end of the day kung ano yung sinubukan kong ituro sa kanila. So yun yung goal lagi, na at the end of the day, personal and relevant sa kanila at na-practice talaga nila.
Very relatable din yung sinabi ni Teacher Christine tungkol sa gusto mo sana nahanda mo na yung buong linggo mo bago pa kayo sumabak sa week na yun. Pero minsan nga dahil sa lahat ng responsibilities ng isang teacher, mahirap yun. Ako admittedly, parang mabibilang ko lang yata sa isang kamay kung ilang beses ako handa na a week in advance sa buong career ko. Although at the same time, it sort of has its advantages being a little bit on your toes. Kasi tulad ng nabanggit ni Coach JR kanina, being on your toes and somewhat being a little bit, di naman sa ill-prepared, but then not quite ahead just yet, it keeps the students in mind. Kumbaga parang lagi mong iniisip, okay, nasaan na ba kami ngayon? And that's a very, very important part to keep in mind as you're teaching. You have to always be where your students are at. Tama? Okay? When it comes to preparing lessons, lalo na pagdating sa math, admittedly, it is a bit more difficult, I think. Especially in trying to make it a little bit more relatable to the students, which is one of the most important points that Coach JR and Teacher Christine mentioned earlier. Pero isa sa mga pinaka-guides ko tuwing gumagawa ako ng lesson ay pinag-iisipan ko talaga ng mabuti. What do I want my students to wonder about when it comes to our lesson? It's easy to think about what do my students need to know. But then again, pag ganun yung pananaw natin, parang nawawala yung joy, kumbaga, sa learning natin. And that's something that I try to keep even if alam ko nga na may mga bias na sila tungkol sa subject natin. So yun, what do I want my students to wonder about pagdating sa topics namin? 2, how can I make them see that? Okay. So dito, kung napansin nyo, medyo kinakalikot ko yung phone ko kanina. Hindi ako nakikinig sa inyo, coaches. Pero I just wanted to pull something out na, I think I mentioned this during the interviews din eh. I mentioned this story. I'm not sure kung makita nyo ngayon. But then I did mention that in order to make my students wonder, I really try to go out there and see what I can bring into the classroom in order to help them see or relate to the ideas that we're taking up. Itong nakalagay sa ulo ko ngayon, or sa picture na ito actually, hindi na naman kita. Actually, parang basketball hoop siya na sinusuot sa ulo. Yung topic namin dati ay tungkol sa quadratic functions which have parabolic graph. Kung titingnan natin ng parabolic graph na yun, mukha siyang tira sa basketball or yung flow ng basketball tuwing binabato siya or kung ano man. So things like that, those are the things that I really try to think of besides the usual objectives and goals that we just try to achieve that are laid out in the curriculum. How do I make them wonder? How do I make it exciting for them talaga?
Wow, that's such a cool idea. Sana nga we did that in math then, but wow, that's so cool talaga. So thank you all for sharing that. I really appreciate your responses and it's very inspiring. So one question I had, and I think you all touched on this a bit. You all talked about, how do we kind of put the students first, keep them in mind. So what kind of things do you do? Ano pong mga ginagawa nyo if you find that your students are not understanding the lesson or kunyari, like there's like a really difficult lesson and students are having a hard time understanding it? Like what are some techniques that you do when that happens?
Okay, well, one thing that I always try to do is to incorporate some kind of social relevance into it. I mean, it's stat. Like nobody thinks of stat as something that, this can help us, understand what's happening around us. It's normally likened to, research or hard math, which it isn't. And I'm sure Coach Anton would agree that stat and math are different things. But that's normally the perception that students have. So, for example, during the we call it our intersession. That's actually our June to July semester. That we were in the midst of the pandemic, which we're still in now. And I mean, as college students, they are, I would say, more socially aware, so it's easier to bring up these kinds of topics. So some of the data that we were using, for example, in class had to do with COVID. Some of the examples had to do with the upcoming elections or the recent elections to try to look at how personality politics has something to do with the way that people vote or identify with candidates. And so, especially some of them are turning 18, so kakavote lang nila, or magvo-vote pa lang sila, or kakavote lang nila. And so this was something that interested them also. So for me, again, they're college students, so being able to bring in the social relevance, I feel kind of makes certain abstract concepts a little bit more understandable. Like one example of that was to see if there's a relationship between the rhetoric of the national government and maybe some of the violence that's happening with the police. Is there a correlation? And then that's when we bring it into, that's when we bring in the topic of correlation and talk about the specifics. But it allows them to kind of grasp what these relationships might be or what these concepts might be trying to say. So that's me.
Ako naman, I try to first think about the cause of why it's happening, kung bakit hindi niya naiintindihan. Pwede kasing internal na baka nahihirapan talaga mag-process yung student, pero pwede rin kasing may external factors. Kunwari, baka may nangyari sa bahay or meron siyang experience with a friend na medyo nadala niya sa loob ng classroom. Pwede rin yung lesson ko, hindi pala ganun ka-effective sa kanya, yung originally planned na lesson ko. So maraming factors yon. So isa yon sa mga dapat pinag-iisipan bago ka kunwari mag-intervention or gumawa ng conclusion na ay bakit kaya niya nahihirapan, siguro mahina kasi siya sa math, mahina siya sa ganito. So I always try to stop myself from making those conclusions right away. So tinitingnan ko muna kung ano yung mga other factors na pwedeng nandun. And then syempre dahil nga mga bata yung tinuturuan ko, yung mga maliliit na bata, talagang yung goal ay developmentally appropriate. So para sa edad ng mga estudyante ko, tama rin yung sinabi ni Coach JR na magandang paghugutan yung mga interest din nila, kung ano yung relevant sa kanila ngayon. Kasi parang mas may sense para sa kanila. Parang madalas kasi pag tayo yung nag-aaral, di ba? Parang pag nahihirapan na tayo, nandun yung moment na, ba't ko ba ito inaaral? Bakit, para saan ba to? So tinatry natin yung i-minimize sa mga, kahit sa mga bata pa lang, para as early as grade 1, kinder, grade 2, ganyan, nandun na yung sense of wonder nila, yung interested talaga sila sa pag-aaral kasi alam nila kung para saan yun. Tsaka nakaka-excite para sa kanila kasi na-a-apply nila sa totoong buhay. Kung halimbawa naman sa mga bata na talagang medyo mas matagal yung pag-intindi nila dun sa mga konsepto, dahil nga developmentally appropriate yung gusto nating goal, dinadaan namin usually sa laro kasi mga bata yun. So, isa sa mga push talaga pagka sa early grades education, paglalaro yung gagamitin mo para matuto yung mga bata. Siguro ito yung isa sa mga advocacies namin as early grades teachers, yung basagin yung konsepto na yung paglalaro, ay laro lang naman yan, dapat nag-aaral yan. So, yun yung gusto naming ipaintindi din syempre sa mga magulang kasi tayo, even us as teachers, we grew up in generations thinking na yung school, yung paglalaro, magkahiwalay yun. So, pag naglalaro ka, ibig sabihin hindi ka nag-aaral. So, yun yung gusto naming sabihin na pag naglalaro yung mga bata, doon nga sila best na nakakapag-aral at doon sila pinaka natututo kasi talagang nandun yung discovery, nandun yung excitement. So, madalas pagka may mga nahihirapan na bata, iniisip lang namin, paano pa ba ito gagawing mas masaya para sa kanila? Paano pa ba magmumukhang parang laro para sa kanila? Para mas medyo may investment sa kanila rin. Minsan din kasi, baka hindi naman dahil nahirapan silang magproseso, baka wala namang ibang external factors, baka naman self-confidence lang rin ang kailangan nating tugunan para matulungan pa silang makita na, ay, kaya ko pala. So, yun, mga iba-ibang bagay na pwede nating i-explore pagka may mga batang nahihirapan. Wala namang one size fits all. So, depende talaga sa konteksto ng bata.
Parang nasabi na nila Coach Christine at Coach JR lahat eh. Pero siguro ang madadagdag ko lang, a little bit more anecdotally. Kasi, ano na nga yun, sa high school, yung parang pinaka-intervention namin, or pag may nakikita kami na may students nga na parang mas matagal yung kailangan niyang oras para maintindihan nga yung inaaral namin, it's yung tinatawag namin na consultation, which is basically just additional time. Para sa mga iba, siguro may isip nila na it's something similar to tutoring. Okay? Minsan kasi, lalo na sa higher, at least sa subject ko, not all of the concepts can be understood in just the snap of a finger or even in the duration of an entire class. And furthermore, may mga ibang estudyante din na pag nasa masyadong malaking classroom kami, dun sila nahihirapan eh. They need a smaller, somewhat more, they need a smaller environment in order to be able to focus or more better grasp the concepts that we're actually discussing. So pag nandun na kami na face-to-face, one-on-one lang kami, or maybe even in a small group, mas komportable na lang nakaharap yung mga pinag-aaralan namin. At besides that, actually, isa sa mga nabanggit din ni Teacher Christine, I think, yung self-confidence. I think that's very, very important, and that's something that I really do focus on and try to imbue in my lessons each and every time I can. Tapos para ma-address yun, one thing that I think, especially now, has been getting a lot of traction is the concept of praise. So yung pagpa-praise natin sa mga estudyante natin for the effort that they put in, malaking bagay din yun. Pero importante din na imbis na parang katangian yung pinupuri natin. Kasi minsan ganun tayo eh. Lalo na dito sa Pilipinas, may kultura tayo na, ay, ang gwapo mo, ay, ang talino mo. Imbis na yun yung pinupuri natin, dapat ang puriin natin ay yung pagsisikap nila. Kumbaga, oh, I see that you worked really hard in order to produce something this beautiful. Keep on doing that. Yung mga ganong bagay. So, yun, those are two things that I really took advantage of. May isang student nga ako na naalala ko pa. Inabot yata kaming 7:30 sa paaralan dahil lang nagko-consult siya sa akin. But then again, it's those kinds of things na, it's those kinds of efforts na, yun nga, that really make the difference. So yun.
Wow, yeah, that really means a lot. Especially me, as a current student, when I notice na a teacher parang notices my effort, kunyari like in class or something like that. Oh, like you did a good job doing this research or whatever. All right, it really makes a big difference. So I really agree with that. Like it really makes a big difference for me. And it gives me kunyari mga like 30 more hours of researching by myself, like alone in my room. So, that really makes a big difference. So aside from teaching, I'm sure you also do a lot of other things at school. So ano po yung mga breaks na you get during the day? Tsaka what do you do during those breaks? Like what, where do you go for lunch? Like how does that like look like for you guys?
Okay, well, for me, I normally do go to the cafeteria for lunch. There's a faculty lounge there, so I kind of go there when when I don't have work or when I don't have class. Then I normally after that go back to the department and I work on other things because I'm also studying right now, so that kind of gives me some time to work on that. And I'm sure alam ni Coach Christine to, alam ni Coach Anton na hindi naman natatapos yung trabaho ng teacher sa classroom. Actually, mas maraming ginagawa sa labas. And so dahil doon, parang kapag wala akong klase, andun talaga ako, siguro nag-check ng papers, gumagawa ng lesson. Kung hindi ako nag-check, gumagawa ng lesson, ginagawa ko yung sarili kong studies. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that. It's but I would say during the breaks also, I mean aside from eating and working, there's also a lot of socialization that happens. So yung mga kaibigan ko sa department, syempre nandun yun. Actually yung girlfriend ko teacher din siya sa Ateneo. So nakikita kami doon. So nakaka-date kami sa cafeteria. So things like that. It's easy enough to get around it. So yeah.
Ako naman, wala akong masyadong day break kasi nga tuloy-tuloy yung class ko. Medyo mahirap kasi sa basic ed kasi one set schedule siya na tuloy-tuloy. So usually yung pinaka-break ko, yung lunch, which is at 11 o'clock kasi nga 12 yung class ko. Usually spent in the faculty room with my co-teachers na sabay-sabay kami nagpe-prepare habang kumakain. And then the next break would be recess, pero that one is spent with the kids naman. So yun yung time na may socialization din, pero socialization with the kids, with the students. Kasi hindi naman ako nakakaalis. Yung recess part pa rin yun ng class time, official class time. So that's the time I used to get to know the kids in a less serious context. So mas relaxed yung mga bata doon, mas nakikilala ko talaga sila. Yung mga usual na hindi nagre-recite sa klase, biglang madaldal pala pagdating ng recess, marami palang pwedeng kwento. So yung mga personal breaks ko ay usually after work na, kung talagang sasabihin ko na hindi ako magtatrabaho after work. Pero agree ako kay Coach JR na hindi siya madalas nangyayari kasi after mong magturo, marami pang kailangan gawin talaga. Pero syempre may effort din, pinupush mo na magkaroon ng work-life balance. So after work and weekends, usually yun yung mga break. So ngayon, or before the pandemic happened, usually na lang yan, pag lalakad sa mall or pagkain or eating out with friends and family. So as simple as that, I appreciate those kinds of breaks naman.
Okay. So, when in school, yung mga breaks namin, at least sa high school, since hindi naman kami self-contained tulad nila Teacher Christine sa K-2, usually yung mga breaks namin, iba-iba din. So, maliban sa lunch break na fixed naman para sa lahat, the times, yung mga periods na hindi ka nagtuturo, well, naituturing din namin break yun. So, usually those kinds of breaks, yun nga, doon ko pinapasok yung mga other work na kailangan kong gawin, whether when it comes to yung advisory duties, yung mga trabaho sa committees, kung ano pa mang papeles yung kailangan namin asikasuhin. Although yung mga breaks namin kung saan break din ng mga bata, usually that's spent with them, or as much as possible, we try to spend that time with them also. Mahalaga din talaga na maliban sa pagsasama niyo sa loob ng classroom, pagdating sa subject niyo, mahalaga din na, yun nga, ma-establish niyo yung relationship. Maka-establish kayo ng mga relationship sa mga students niyo in a less formal setting, like what Teacher Christine said. Oddly enough, that's one thing that I think some teachers don't utilize enough. I think that's one thing that they might not think of, that if they actually employ into their teaching will provide so much so much to gain for the students in terms of their learning, because a lot of learning is really relational. And the same goes for spending those times with co-teachers. If there's one thing that I really value and I really, really miss, it's being able to spend time with co-teachers in the faculty room. Whether pinag-uusapan nyo lang yung kung may nakakatawang kwento lang sa loob ng classroom na nangyari kanina, o kung may natutunan kayong strategy na biglang gumana sa klase na to, baka pwede niyong gamitin din sa sarili niyong klase. So yung mga ganong bagay, it's about building relationships, and usually my breaks, I spend them, aside from trying to get work done, I spend them trying to build relationships with my students and co-teachers, and also trying to learn from them then.
Wow, yeah, all great answers, and I'm really learning a lot. I feel like yung mga sinabi nyo is actually it's really useful not just for teaching as a profession, but for any profession. So I really appreciate that. One thing you mentioned, the three of you mentioned po kanina was, madaming responsibilidad ang guro, and then you do a lot of stuff both at school, outside of school. So, kamusta naman po yung work-life balance nyo, and how do you make time for, other things you want to do? And if you can talk a bit about like your other activities, maybe someone is secretly like a chef or like a rock, or I don't know, like kung ano yung mga hobbies nyo, and how do you make time for that while having a full-time job as a teacher?
Okay, so again, well, I'm lucky enough. I'm part-time. I'm a part-time teacher. So I teach siguro ilan yun, mga 9 to 10 minutes per semester, which equates to mga 10 hours inside the classroom per week. And so given that, that's normally spread out across 2 to 3 days, I do have enough time to kind of plan things out. And so I also work as a psychologist. So normally, yun yung Mondays, Fridays, Saturdays, nagki-clinic ako, tapos nagtuturo ako ng Monday night to Thursday morning, parang ganun. So meron akong time to kind of separate these two things. And dahil part-time ako, at dahil pina-practice ko rin yung profession ko as a psychologist, both of them kind of allow me to move my schedule around. So again, I'm lucky enough to be able to do that. And dahil doon, nakakaroon ako ng time para, to hang out with friends, to hang out with my girlfriend. Pero nag-PhD ako ngayon, so medyo nawalan ako ng, dati after class, I would box maybe 3 to 4 times a week. Ngayon, well, first of all, pandemic, so nawala yun. Secondly, nung nag-umpisa ako mag-PhD, medyo that lessened a lot. So medyo umiba yung priority ko for at least the next couple of years or so. And during the weekends, nakakahanap rin naman ako ng time para makita yung mga friends ko and to spend time with my family. So I try to make a conscious effort na hanggang dito lang ang work, kunwari, whether it be teaching or whether it be psychology, parang at a certain time, on a certain day, sasabihin ko na, okay, that's enough. Do what you want. Mag-games ka muna, mag-usap kayo ng friends niya. I really try as much as possible to set those boundaries. So there.
Ako, kanina ko pa siya iniisip eh. Siguro if you asked me this question maybe during my first 4-5 years of teaching, I would have said there's no such thing as work-life balance. It's all work. Nung time kasi na yon, parang may konsepto ako or yung mindset ko ay kung gusto ko talagang tulungan yung estudyante ko, kailangan devoted yung yung oras ko, lahat ng oras ko sa kanila. Tapos may time pa kasi na, like I said, I'm also coaching a softball team before the pandemic. Nagko-coach ako ng softball team. So those ate up my weekends. So weekends ko siya nagagawa. And then weekdays I'm teaching. Tapos, so yun, talagang iniisip ko, hindi kailangan ko itong gawin kasi I want to be a good teacher. I want to be there for my students. It doesn't matter. I'm super willing to not have a life outside of teaching kasi ito yung gusto kong gawin talaga for my students. But then, syempre, nandun yung maturity, you start to realize that's not very healthy. Yung kami ng mga friends ko na co-teachers, we always say, you can't pour from an empty cup. So parang kami dati, ang sinasabi namin, parang nung mga teacher friends ko, yung hashtag pa namin nun, buhos. Ibig sabihin, ibuhos mo lahat sa mga estudyante mo. Tapos parang na-realize namin, ano bang ibubuhos natin kung walang matitira sa atin? So kailangan talaga may balanse ka. Siguro, since this is more like we want to talk to aspiring teachers, I kind of want to take this opportunity also, kahit na sorry kung medyo magiging serious siya ng konti. Gusto kong i-take yung time na to say na alam ko lagi nating naririnig na teaching is a noble profession. Maganda naman yung pakinggan na na-appreciate ng mga tao yung ginagawa natin para sa mga estudyante natin. Pero siguro gusto ko rin sana na yung mga bagong henerasyon ng mga teachers, hindi masyadong panghawakan yun, na sana itrato nyo pa rin yung sarili nyo bilang professionals. Kasi kung tutuusin, professional naman talaga ang mga teachers. This is a profession. Kasi parang para sa akin, pag sinabi mong noble profession, minsan yung ibang tao, they use it as an excuse to overwork, to underpay, para hindi lang ibigay yung tamang treatment. Parang sa tingin ng ibang tao, tama na yung thank you, tama na yung Teacher's Day, may regalo pagka special day, ganyan. Pero sa tingin ko, o kasama nung pag-mature ko as a teacher, nandun din yung hindi lang para sa estudyante dapat yung iniisip ko. Dapat nagiging parte din ako dun sa pagsulong ng pag-unlad ng teaching as a profession. Parang kung ako mismo, sasabihin ko sa sarili ko na okay lang sa akin na mawala ng buhay basta matulungan ko yung estudyante ko. Parang ano yung sinasabi ko noon sa ibang teacher, parang ina-expect ko na ganun din dapat sila, na pagka nag-e-enjoy sila o nagbe-break sila, parang sinasabi ko naman na hindi sila magaling na teacher. So parang na-realize ko na medyo toxic yung ganong mentality, and I think a lot of teachers still need to unlearn that. Kahit naman ako na cognitively or in my mind, naiisip ko na siya, dun sa behavior ko, kailangan ko pa siyang i-unlearn talaga. So, I think pagdating sa usaping work-life balance, very, very important siya in any profession, but specifically for the teaching profession, importante siya para makita din ng mga tao kung ano yung level of professionalism na dapat binibigay din sa mga teachers. So, sa tingin ko, parang part na rin yun ng responsibility na gusto ko na rin i-take on, na gusto kong ipakita sa mga tao na hindi pwedeng thank you na lang kay teacher tuwing nag-overtime siya or overwork siya. Sana mabigyan din ng halaga yung teachers in such a way na tama yung pagtrato sa kanya. So, yun. Sana ngayon, dahil doon, tinatry ko talaga, pinupush ko na magkaroon ng work-life balance. Minsan, kung kakailanganin, nagpapatay talaga ako or nag-mute ako ng mga phone ko, ng chat ko, na pagdating ng 6 o'clock, me time muna, hihinga muna ako. Minsan kasi pag nagmamarathon ka ng trabaho, parang di mo na-realize, 8 o'clock na pala, 10 o'clock na pala. So yun, even weekends, pinupush ko yung sarili ko magkaroon ng ibang hobbies kasi at some point in my teaching career, I realized, shucks, parang wala pala akong hobbies. Parang yung weekends ko, some sort of teaching din yung ginagawa ko. So I'm not really doing much for myself. And that's very important, not just for selfish reasons, but also so you can refill your cups para meron ka rin mabigay sa mga estudyante mo. So yun, I've been trying to be more active. Nag-try na ako ng mga physical activities like going to the gym, wall climbing. So talagang extra effort lang rin to not feel guilty for doing those things na hindi work-related.
Okay, sa totoo lang, yung sagot ko kanina na naisip na para sa tanong na to, medyo nakalimutan ko na dahil sobrang ganda ng sinabi ni Teacher Christine, lalo na sa, well, admittedly, a little bit of a point more serious than we would have thought would come up today. But then it is very important to bring that up then na, yun nga, tulad ng nabanggit kanina, we do have this notion of teaching being a noble profession. And in fact, we tend to glamorize that a little bit too much. And we tend to glamorize that to the point na minsan tinatanggap na lang natin yung mga hindi rin talagang makatao na nangyayari sa mga teachers natin. Like if you see in the news right now, you see teachers crossing rivers, literally gumagapang sila sa ugat ng puno para lang makatawid papunta sa mga estudyante nila, umaakyat ng bubong para para makakuha ng maayos na signal para lang may maibahagi sila mga estudyante nila. So I think definitely that's something that we also do have to take note of, lalo na para sa mga explorers din natin. I know that they may have this very heroic view of teachers also, but then at the same time, we also have to kind of draw a line. Okay? Tama na kailangan niyo talagang ibuhos yung sarili niyo para sa sa profession na ito para sa mga estudyante nyo para magkaroon talaga ng lasting change ang ginagawa natin sa classroom. But then at the same time, we do have to sort of make a more conscious effort into drawing the line and being able to tell also society then na okay, thank you for the recognition, but then at the same time makatarungan nga ba talaga yung these things that we're resorting to doing just to be able to fulfill our job. But then to go back on a little bit of a smaller scale, yung work-life balance, actually that's kind of funny. Medyo I do share somewhat a similar sentiment to teacher Christine, but then yung nabanggit niya na from her first 4 or 6 years in teaching, until now, I still kind of see work-life balance as not really something you can achieve as a teacher, but then mainly in terms of time. Kasi usually yung iniisip natin pag sinasabi natin work-life balance, we usually have this notion of the time we spent. Dapat as much as possible, parang patas yung work tsaka yung personal life natin. But then, given all the responsibilities that the teacher can take on, tulad ng nabanggit ng mga iba din, it's next to impossible, admittedly. So instead of trying to balance your time or trying to focus on that particular aspect of having a certain balance, mas achievable at mas makikip mo yung sanity mo kung maisip mo siya in terms of balancing your energy. Tulad ng nabanggit din ni Teacher Christine kanina, you can't pour from an empty cup. So you have to be able to make sure that cup always has something in it. And yun, that's to make sure that there's something in that cup that we have. Doon papasok yung mga hobbies natin, yung mga ibang interests, ibang passions. Medyo ironic nga medyo contradictory na may mga ibang bagay na kung saan yun, we pour out our energy towards those things. We're supposed to be expending energy and therefore dapat mapagod din tayo sa mga bagay na yun. Pero yung mga bagay na yun din yung nagbibigay ng lakas pa para sa atin, para makatuloy tayo sa ibang mga responsibilities or ibang mga passion natin. For example, Teacher Christine has had her softball coaching. Nakakapagod din mag-coach siya. That somewhat added fuel to her fire. Si Coach JR, may clinic din siya. So that's another way, even if it's still somewhat related to what he teaches, the fact that it's a different aspect of being able to practice yung discipline niya, nakakadagdag din yun sa passion niya or sa fire niya para sa pagtuturo. Ako, napaisip tuloy ako, I don't think I have anything that serious. Although, whenever I do get my alone time, whether that's by reading, by doing some sort of physical activity, by baking, medyo surprising yun baka, or spending time with my family, yun yung mga nakakadagdag sa passion ko sa pagtuturo. And you really have to find those activities, even if it's just 1 or 2. Kahit magbasa lang or kahit magsulat ka lang, you really have to find those kinds of activities that will somewhat stoke your fire, but in a different way.
Yeah, again, all great answers. Yung mga sinabi niyo po about kind of like teaching being a noble profession, I think that's a super important point and a super important topic. And I'm super grateful now we're able to discuss it here. Because especially for, aspiring teachers, I definitely think that's a really important kind of like topic that, should be talked about. So thank you for sharing that. So we actually have a question from our Facebook. I'll read it to you. In terms of collaboration with other teachers, paano po yung collaboration with other teachers and how do you do this? Or what ways do you collaborate with other teachers?
I would say there are maybe, I won't put a number to it, but there are different ways. One of which, pwede naman mag-co-teach. Hindi ko alam kung nagiging option din sa mga ibang schools. Pero minsan may mga times na nagko-co-teach yung mga teachers. Maybe, especially if it's like a specialized course, parang pwedeng mag-co-teach. Bukod doon, malaking bagay yung pag-meet sa curriculum. That's where a lot of collaboration, hindi lang collaboration, pati debate, arguments, but it is also a source of collaboration, being able to talk about ano sa tingin ng isang guro ang mga kailangan, i-teach during that particular time period. And so, yeah, teaching, I would say, although siguro like at first glance, it might seem like an individual job kasi, isa lang naman normally teacher, sarap ng classroom, but that does like need the effort of multiple people, multiple teachers. And so, yeah, collaboration is there, and it can be seen in like things that aren't necessarily um, very obvious. And so these are just a couple of ways. I'm sure Coach Christine and Coach Anton will probably give us, other ways that collaboration occurs.
Okay, for me, I've always been lucky because collaboration has been a big part of my teaching life. Especially now, actually, I'm looking at the Facebook comments and my co-teachers are tagging me on it. And even my department head is saying hi. So my department head is actually part of my level as well. And in my school, it's a big part of the culture. So we put in a lot of effort to collaborate in terms of the bigger ideas. So we do a lot of yearly and semestral plannings. But Coach JR is right. So it might seem like an individualistic profession because you're the only one doing it in front of the kids, especially since I'm a self-contained teacher. So it would seem like I'm in charge of all the subjects, and then it feels so overwhelming because you have to do it on your own. Like some teachers can't imagine preparing for 4 or 5 subjects at a time every day. So I always just tell them I'm not doing it on my own. I'm doing it with 4 to 12 other people. So it's always just the culture that you build in your school of sharing ideas. So even though I'm in a self-contained class and we have the academic freedom to do any activity in the classroom, there's always that culture of, hey, I tried this out. Baka gusto mong subukan sa klase mo, or sinubukan ko to kahapon sa klase ko, sobrang nag-enjoy sila, baka gusto nyong subukan din sa inyo. So laging may ganong sharing. So talagang nakaano na siya sa culture namin na every SEM, mag-update din kami. Tapos even, siguro, I don't know, I hope this is the same for all other schools. Pero ako kasi na-appreciate ko na kahit students ng co-teachers ko, kilala ko sa sobrang dami naming kwentuhan. Kahit yung mga in-between breaks or yung mag-meet lang kami sa hagdana na kailangan ko lang talaga itong ikwento kasi nakakatawa or nakakatuwa siyang ikwento sa co-teacher. So parang feeling ko rin, kahit na 4 kami kasi sa grade level namin na teacher. So 4 self-contained classes. Pero parang feeling ko kilala ko rin yung 3 sections kasi ganun ka intense din yung collaboration namin. So it's not a requirement to share your activities with the other teachers, but I think that's what makes it better kasi hindi nga siya required pero kusa kayong nag-share. I think in all the schools I've been in, ganun naman yung culture na nakikita ko na pag may magandang idea, hindi siya nagdadamutan. Kasi wala naman talagang contest eh. So talagang ang goal ng mga teachers na nakikilala ko, I've been very fortunate na yung mga teachers na kilala ko, ang goal ay as many kids as possible na maturuan ng mabuti at mag-enjoy sa pag-aaral. So nandun lagi yung culture na yun na magtulungan.
So likewise, collaboration is really a big part of yun. I consider it a huge part of my teaching. Kahit sa amin kasi, sa department namin, kadalasan, ang nangyari dati at least, kada teacher may sariling grade level na usually sila yung may hawak doon para sa buong taon. Minsan may kahati, may ka-team teach. Pero usually, pag sinabing may isang subject, let's say Math 9A or yung 9 Algebra, pag nabanggit yun, usually, ang maisip ng mga students, si Sir Reloy yan. Parang na-associate na yung individual teacher doon sa subject na yun. But then even if there are those kind of associations, not just with the students, but even with the teachers, yun. Collaboration is a big part. And it's really born out of just that passion to give the students the best. Because when you have that passion or when you have that determination, you'll really look for ideas wherever you can. And why look further out when you have other teachers who are just as creative and have and who may offer such a different perspective as you. You might find something that you never thought of in them, eh. And you'd be surprised at where you could get these ideas. Minsan, yung mga nakapulot ko ng mga strategies na nagamit ko sa classroom, minsan hindi sa mga ka-department ko, minsan sa mga nakakausap ko mula sa Filipino, sa English, or so. But then even within my department, I was very fortunate to have a solid group of young co-teachers. Actually, may pangalan nga kami, juniors. Hindi ko alam kung nanonood sila, pero kung nanonood sila, hello. Halos lahat ng lesson plans namin, even if admittedly we weren't really required to create lesson plans, anything that we think of with regards to constructing lessons, we run it by each other. Tinitingnan namin, tinatanong namin sa isa't isa, sa tingin mo ba okay kung gawin ko to? Or sa tingin nyo ba papatok kung ito na lang gamitin natin imbes na ito? So having a different set of eyes or a different perspective, see the work and contribute to that work, it can give you so much more than what you could have produced kung nagsarili ka lang eh. And even with my more senior mentors, I cannot express how thankful I am also for the more experienced teachers that I've had. Sila talaga yung naging parang parents ko sa faculty. I'm not sure if they'd appreciate me saying that. But then there's so much advice also from their years or maybe even decades. Again, I'm not sure if they'd appreciate me saying that. But then their decades of experience na hindi mo rin makukuha sa na hindi mo rin makukuha within your first few years. So just being able to be open with all your co-teachers, whether within your department, regardless of age level, regardless of the subject that you teach, it can only add to what you're doing for your students, to what you're trying to achieve in the classroom.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I don't know, yung mga answers niyo po are just like really inspiring and motivating to me. I feel like I personally learned a lot on, you know, my personal like work ethic, how I can collaborate better with other people. But yeah, so moving on to the next question on Facebook. Question po ni Bless Chavez. Posible po ba na gawin yung ibang desires natin kahit na nag-teach na po? So, i.e. teaching and then working in a theater for weekends.
Hello, sorry, you got kind of choppy there. Could you? I got choppy. Could you repeat that?
Sorry. It was about posible po bang gawin yung ibang desires or like hobbies kahit na nagte-teach na po, like on the weekends. Kind of like what you were mentioning earlier.
Yes. Yes, actually, yeah, nakita ko yung question na yun nung lumabas siya sa live feed natin. And yeah, it is doable. I mean, Coach Christine is one person that shows that that's possible. And that is with a full-time sched. Again, parang ako part-time also, meron akong luxury to be able to do that. Pero being a teacher doesn't mean that mawawala naman yung mga ibang gusto mo sana mangyari. And like what Coach Christine was saying, and like what all of us were saying is, for me, personally, the reason I put up boundaries doesn't mean that hindi ako passionate dito sa field na to, but because it allows me to give myself in different places. Sinasabi nga ni Christine kanina na hindi ka makapour, or you can't pour from an empty cup. And sometimes these extra things, ito, especially yung mga desires or passions that it seems that people are talking about, nakaka-fill up din to ng cup na yun. And so it is about being able to, I guess, it's not even necessarily just time management, but it's also, like, for lack of a better term, self-care, that this can fall under self-care, doing other things. And self-care is normally glamorized also, that, you know, kailangan reactive ng self-care. Kapag stressed ako, sige, magpapapedi ako. Kapag stressed ako, doon ako lalabas. Pero sometimes, well, not sometimes, but in fact, it's better when self-care is done actively, wherein you put up certain things that allow you to take care of yourself in the long run, one of which might be, again, putting up boundaries when it comes to time. Others might be doing things that you love also outside of teaching and making time for that too. So yes, I would say that it's very possible.
Awesome. So I think we actually, or I don't know if anyone has anything else to add to that, or if we already answered that one.
Yeah, I agree. It's possible. Actually, I would even argue it's necessary, not just possible. Because ako naman personally, kaya if I reflect, I think the reason why I was able to do teaching during the weekdays and then coaching on the weekends was because I loved coaching. I loved softball. I used to play myself. But then when I grew up, I couldn't play anymore. So parang I resorted to coaching just to still be near the sport. So parang that was a hobby that I was doing on the side din. So parang doon din ako humuhugot ng energy na feeling ko kung nagtuturo lang talaga ako tapos I had nothing else going on in my life, baka yung mga stress na nararamdaman ko sa teaching, talagang nakain or na-consume na ako noon eh. But because I had something to look forward to during the weekend na I felt was for me, and it was something that was giving me life, parang feeling ko pagbalik ko ng Monday, kahit na may game kami nung Sunday, sobrang pagod, sobrang maaraw, parang hindi siya draining. Parang feeling ko yun pa yung pinanghugutan ko ng energy na ready na ako for the whole week kasi I gave time for myself and I did something that wasn't very work related. So I think, but then that's also easier said than done. Siguro maganda lang ring sabihin na it's going to be a difficult journey na you have to make difficult decisions also kung in terms of time management, may adjustments ka talagang gagawin. And also not to disregard people who might not have that luxury of being able to keep the job and then doing things just for fun during the weekend. Parang mahirap talaga siya, but it will take a lot of effort to adjust your schedule, your mindset, na parang, o sige, okay lang. Yung parang, what are the things that you're okay with letting go? Parang ganon. So that's part of it then, for you to be able to do things that you think you'll love or you'll enjoy. May kapalit din siya na parang if you're looking at reality, you can't have it all naman talaga. So you just have to prioritize and be okay with the things that you can't really do for now. Maybe set time for it in the future, but yung tatanggapin mo lang na, sige, gusto kong mag-theater after mag 5-day teaching week, pero baka hindi lang ako masyadong makalabas with my friends. So may mga ganun lang na you have to be able to pick out which ones will energize you the most or will make sense in your life.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you expecting also an answer from me?
Oh, I know. I feel like you answered a lot of that already a while ago. So, no pressure. I don't know if you have anything to add, or if not, we actually have a really good question.
Sige.
Okay.
I think we can move on along naman.
Okay. So the next question is actually, it's a really, sorry, my alarm is going off. It's like morning. But yeah, so the next question is actually a really good question. And I know we talked a bit about this a while ago also. So how can you avoid burnout or getting too drained from long hours sitting down in front of the computer, making lesson plans, etc.? And this is from somebody who teaches 5 different grade levels. So I don't know if you have tips about that.
Okay, I'll go very quickly. And like little breaks can do wonders actually. And alam ko na parang sanay na tayo na dapat sunod-sunod talaga yung pagtrabaho natin. And I mean, as much, and Coach Christine was saying this a while ago, that as much as, this is a noble profession, I mean, bilang mga tao, meron din tayong limitations. And sometimes, truthfully speaking, like, we may not be able to give our best every day. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with not being able to give 100% every day. Kasi yan nga, that will lead to burnout. And so, some practical tips might be to allow yourself to take maybe 15 to 20-minute breaks every hour or so. A lot of people have reward systems, diba, na parang, okay, kung nag-aaral kayo, sige, after ako magbasa ng 30 pages, kaya na ako ng gummy bears. I don't know, but that's one way. And this is another way of doing it. Rewarding yourself with breaks there's nothing wrong with that. Not only does it allow you to, recompose, but it's also something to look forward to. And so that's kind of hitting 2 birds with 1 stone in doing so. Secondly, again, like, this really is a noble profession, pero importante din yung sarili. And I've just mentioned self-care. And one really big part of self-care is being aware of when you're at your limit and allowing yourself to take that break when necessary. And so I really, advocate, if I could say that, advocate for taking breaks while working. Kasi we can't expect ourselves to just work 24/7, 100%. that's kind of like a norm that's become something with, late stage capitalism, for example. So that doesn't necessarily, like, our worth shouldn't be defined by our work also. And sometimes that's what kind of pushes us to keep going. So yeah, just hinay-hinay lang pag kailangan. Yun.
Ako, I agree with what Coach JR said na you have to know your limits also. I think it starts with knowing when you need to step back and being able to admit when you're at that point where you just need a break. So, hindi lang siya yung small breaks. Yeah, the small breaks help para in the long run, hindi ka dumating dun sa talagang major burnout. Pero siguro, just to give perspective in my own experience, even though I love teaching, I love what I was doing even during the weekends, the truth was that I was just really overwhelmed with everything that I had to do. So when I was mentioning a while ago, just having that mindset where you're okay of letting things go, I actually experienced it with my team because when I was feeling super overwhelmed, I came to a point where I realized, okay, maybe I need to step back a little bit from coaching and let other people, the people who were helping me, take over for a while. It devastated me for a while because I felt like I was letting my girls down, because I was letting people down who believed in the program. I felt like I was failing. But then um, after maybe a few months, maybe a year of just deloading from the things that I had to do, parang it felt like, okay, that was the right move. Parang kailangan ko pala talaga yun kasi baka pag tinuloy-tuloy ko pa yun, I might end up resenting it already and that would have been much worse. So, yung just having that mindset and being humble enough to realize na hindi ko na pala kaya, kailangan ko munang mag-step back, let other people take the wheel and ako magre-re-energize muna ako. I think that's a very good first step to avoid burnout or to heal yourself when you're at that point of being burnt out. So just really admitting when you can't do it anymore.
Jumping off of that last point, then, yeah, speaking from experience, then, there was there was actually a time during my last year of teaching, oddly enough, that I actually almost resigned. So, um, I was placed in a bit of in quite an unfamiliar assignment, actually, not just a bit. It was very different because from the high school, I was moved down to the elementary school, and even if it's just a few grades down, there's such a huge shift in culture that it na culture shock talaga. And well, I didn't want to reveal it to my kada just yet. I felt like it would have been more appropriate on a different day. But then, um, teacher Christine is right in the sense that you have to be able to recognize, and also Coach JR said this, you have to recognize your limits and you have to be willing to let go of some certain things. And um, this might be a little bit unexpected, but then one of those things then is a certain sense of responsibility, especially when you're a teacher. There's a certain sometimes you just feel so responsible for the students that you have, that everything that you do or every little result or every little outcome that happens in your classes, you take ownership of that, and that happens especially when these outcomes are somewhat negative, and those negative outcomes also take a toll on you because you think that since you're responsible for whatever this is that's happening or the lack uh, of certain type of learning that's happening, it can really take a toll on a teacher's mental health. And I think that's what happened to me during my last year. I really felt that I was failing my students. That's already what I was feeling, and it was getting harder and harder to really do my job. Even if I did have so much love for my students, every day na lang it seemed as if everything was going wrong, and I was taking it all on me, or I was putting the weight of all those things on my shoulders. And it's only when I was really able to talk to my higher ups, to my co-teachers, and when they were also able to tell me that, Sir Anton, we see your effort, we see that you're putting in what you need to put in to make sure that these kids learn. leave some responsibility also for your students. Because if you're already extending yourself out there, but then they're not sort of reaching back, then that's kind of not on you na eh. And that's what I had a hard time understanding then. So yun, you have to also sort of you have to realize, or you have to understand when where your responsibility ends then when it comes to your teaching, because there really is so much you can do, as you can see, as exemplified by all these teachers that we see in the news doing these extraordinary feats. But then sometimes you have to, like what we've all mentioned earlier, we have to know also when to draw the line, or where to draw the line, and when to really save some for yourself. That's why actually one of my guiding mottos in life is really aspire to inspire. That last part, it's given that that's really a teacher's job, to inspire, to really encourage whoever they're in charge of to create these changes, to grow into better people. But then that first part is what often gets left behind. That sort of that notion of aspiring. When you aspire, kasi parang you're still living your life. It's still your life. If you're just living your life for other people without leaving anything for yourself, that's not being able to live your life anymore, in a way. So that's why dun papasok din yung balance na yun, of being able to save some for yourself so that you could give to your students.
Thank you for that. Tsaka thank you po, teachers, for really, pouring your heart out to us. We really appreciate it, and I know our students will also appreciate it. So that really means a lot. I know medyo overtime na po tayo, but we have one more quick yes or no question from Facebook. So from Val, if you had to choose, would you still be a teacher tomorrow? Yes or no? Wow.
Yeah.
Resounding
I
yes.
don't have enough time to say how much I actually miss the classroom. Kasi yun nga, I'm the only one who's not actually teaching out of the three of us right now, and even more so since I joined this program, since I got on board with mentoring these teachers, did I realize that, okay, I really miss being in the classroom. I really miss being with these passionate minds who are just so willing to learn, so willing to grow. So yeah, I wish I had more thumbs to say yes to that.
Well, that's super exciting po. And yeah, it's really, I don't know, it's really inspiring to hear you talk about your profession and just how you care about your students. And with that, yun na po yung lahat ng tanong natin from Facebook and from us as well. So I just wanted to thank you three again po for, first of all, being here today. I know it's late for you, and I know you all have a lot of responsibilities. So thank you for being here, spending the hour with us. And thank you for being a couldn't do this without you. And what you do, your work really means a lot to us, and it's really kind of like building up our entire like community and platform. So yeah, we really couldn't do this without you. So madaming salamat po, and yeah, we'll see you in the next webinar. Thank you for your time today, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Thank you.